Part 41. They spent the Chinese New Year's Eve in the cold palace. Your Majesty, it's night, it's time to order the sign. Xiao Beiji led a eunuch who was bowing down and holding a sign, and cautiously entered the study. Originally thought that Xia Linxuan would not turn over brand, but after seeing him muttering for a while, he turned over concubine Luo's brand. The eunuch holding the sign went out happily, and Xiao Beiji was stunned for a moment and then hurriedly smiled. The slave will order someone to inform concubine Luo to prepare. And mother must be very happy. Xia Linxuan nodded, and after Xiao Beiji arranged for someone to inform him, he came back to serve Xia Linxuan to put on his cloak, but he heard the master ask. Qiutai entered the cold palace on the first day today. How is the situation? Oh, Xiao Beiji thought to himself. Okay, you really asked. I knew that the emperor couldn't hold it back. Tisk. You were still worried about beating people into the cold palace. My master estimated that it was the first share, this. Not. How do you tell the emperor? What's wrong? What's wrong? Xia Linxuan saw that Xiao Beiji's movements stopped, and he immediately became anxious, but he heard this henchman eunuch say helplessly, it's not inappropriate. It's too proper to be more proper. I heard that the Yunhai Palace finally sent the Honglian girl to the cold palace, dressed like a big pill, all the way to go. It is better to go to the cold palace. Which attracted many people to look sideways. What do you mean? Xia Linxuan frowned. What do you mean to go to the cold palace? The emperor thought, her head is densely inserted. At least 2 thick mink cloaks are put on her body, and her clothes are stuffed with gold, silver and copper coins. Isn't that a ball? Xiao Beiji said as he spoke, and he couldn't help laughing. His Majesty Emperor, who heard this, was even more embarrassed, and it took a long time before he coughed, stretched out his thumb and exclaimed, "Good job, I just said that they are good." Sure enough. They finally lived up to my favor to them, Maruko? Ha ha ha, how did they come up with it? His Majesty Emperor, who was exhausted, finally left the shadow in his heart. Thinking that the next thing was the main event, he sneered and ordered to drive the Yinyu Palace. How many cows, ghosts, snakes, and gods are hidden in this palace? From today onwards, he must take a good look at it. The first day he went to the cold palace, there were so many stories, whereas this still like being in the cold palace. Half leaning comfortably on the couch, Li Qingyu held the stove, slowly brushed the ashes inside, and listened to the henchman Huang Li next to her report the situation in the cold palace. And her face gradually became difficult to look at. The slave said the same thing, but for some reason, the people in the imperial dining room also turned a blind eye. That Cao Qinglin is the most snobbish, not to mention the people in the cold palace. He is an ordinary concubine who has fallen out of favor. What good things can he get from him to eat? Why is it different for concubine Wen now? He had the idea of burning a cold stove. Although concubine Wen went to the cold palace, but he was unparalleled in favor before. And now he was sent in without committing any great sin. Once the emperor regretted it, and directly brought people out of the cold palace. With his care these days, can concubine Wen not be grateful? What's more, even if he doesn't burn this cold stove, Honglian is also a proud palace maid in front of the emperor, and he doesn't dare to offend him. After Li Qingyu finished sneering, she put down the hand stove, stood up and came to the window, looked at the goose feathers and snow outside the window, and said softly, "The emperor rested in the Yinyu Palace last night, right? Today, he passed the decree early, saying that he was coming to us, no matter what, as soon as this concubine Wen goes, the order of the harem will return to normal. But if you don't get rid of him, this normal order, I'm afraid it won't last long." Huang Li's heart tightened, and she hurriedly stepped forward and whispered, "Mother, but you want to make a move? It's just that now the emperor's mind is unclear, in case What should I do if I anger the emperor? After all, concubine Wen used to favor the harem alone. But it was not comparable to the queen's sick seedling. Li Qingyu said lightly. The queen is because of the queen's position and the power of the seal. And concubine Wen is more harmful than the queen. The more unclear the emperor's intentions, the more he must take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get rid of him. Otherwise, once the emperor regrets it, when will we have to wait until we have a chance? That's hard to say. Previously, I sent that letter to the emperor just for such an opportunity, and if I don't grasp it now, that opportunity will be fleeting. Huang Li hurriedly said softly, yes. The slave understands, but I don't know what mother's plans are. Li Qingyu raised her eyebrows slightly, and suddenly sneered, even if the emperor changes his mind, he will be embarrassed to welcome back concubine Wen for a while, and he will always let him stay in the cold palace for 3 or 5 months. So, do what I tell you to do first. Huang Li hurriedly listened to Li Qingyu's whispered words. Her eyes couldn't help but light up, and she gave a thumbs up and said, Mother, this method is really quiet. In this way, even if our people are driven out by Honglian, there is no need to worry about not being able to do it. It's just that I'm afraid that concubine Wen has a cold temperament. What if he doesn't come out? Li Qingyu said with a smile. Don't forget, he is accompanied by 2 children. And the cold palace is originally deserted. If there is such a lively scene, then the sister and brother can bear it. Even if they can endure it, concubine Wen must be considerate of their feelings and take them out. You just do what I tell you to do, and if it really doesn't work, let's think of another way. Yes, Mother. Huang Li went out behind her. Here Li Qingyu stopped in front of the window for a long time. She killed the queen with the most invisible means, and originally thought that she was only 1 step away from the supreme position in the harem, but unexpectedly killed a Pu Qiutai in the air and took away all the favor. Why didn't she grit her teeth? And the queen died, and no one in the palace found out the clues, which naturally increased her confidence. Now as long as Pu Qiutai is also sick and slowly dies after 2 or 3 years of delay, I think no one can compete with her anymore. Although concubine Luo's grade is higher than herself, in terms of the power of her mother's family and the emperor's favor, the other party is still inferior. Mother got up early today. It snowed all night last night, and it was very cold outside. Although there was no wind, but it was dry and cold. Honglian picked up the curtain and came in, and when she saw that Pu Qiutai was already dressed, she said with a smile, Yes. I feel a little cold. It turned out to be snowing again last night. There is a lot of snow this year, and after entering the lunar month, there are 3 heavy snowfalls. And I don't know how the people will spend this winter. Pu Qiutai shook his head and sighed. While standing up, Honglian saw that he seemed to be going out. So she hurriedly put on the mink cloak for him, and said with a smile, Why should mother worry? Although it was only 4 years for the daimyo to enter the Central Plains, it was also a peaceful and prosperous era, and the slaves and maids heard from the eunuchs who bought yesterday that there were several markets in the capital, which were very lively. This year's year is good. The people have money in their hands, not only in the capital, but also in all parts of the country, saying that the people's lives are very prosperous. And people are all grateful for the emperor's kindness. Pu Qiutai shook his head slightly. He originally wanted to say that Thanksgiving was just a formality. But when he thought of Xia Linxuan's political achievements, and remembered what his younger brother said to him when he came, he swallowed it. I heard Honglian muttering again. The emperor is afraid that he doesn't know how to regret it. If he didn't get the mother into the cold palace, wouldn't it be good to go out with you to see the people's feelings everywhere? It's also good to let the mother feel relieved. Pu Qiutai said lightly. I'm in the cold palace, but I've been clean these days, don't think of anything else. After saying that, when he came to the door, he saw Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang running in from outside the door, their face flushed with excitement, and when they saw him, they laughed and exclaimed, "Uncle." Today is Chinese New Year's Eve, and we saw several people piling firewood in the big yard in front, saying that they were going to roast 2 sheep at night and set off fireworks. Huh? Is there still such excitement in the cold palace? Honglian was also a little surprised. She hadn't been to the cold palace, so she didn't know how the cold palace spent the new year. But now that she heard it, it was okay. Pu Qiutai didn't care and said, "What about the cold palace? After all, it's also a human being, and the new year is not lively. On this day, I think that other people will not be as indifferent as usual, just 2 roast sheep, what's the big deal?" Honglian nodded, "That's probably the case. The slave maid has been in the palace for so many years, but I don't know that this harem still has a bit of human touch. Speaking of which, only after the mother entered the palace. Yunhai Palace was not a palace, it was a family. Not so, and the slaves and maids would not cry until the emperor compromised." While a few people were talking, they came to the large courtyard of the cold palace under the leadership of Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang, which was also surrounded by houses, but it was not where people lived, but where they worked. There is a shortage of materials in the cold palace. Where can those concubines who have fallen out of favor be as strong as Honglian? Even if you bring some gold and silver jewelry. But in a year or 2, you will be empty. If you want to live a little more comfortable, you can only endure the shame of coming here to rely on the work of grinding rice and making clothes and women's red, in exchange for a very meager reward. Today is Chinese New Year's Eve, and the eunuch palace maid in the courtyard of the big field cleaned up early in the morning. At this time there are 2 piles of firewood in the middle, and 2 goats are tied under the tree, which is used for slaughtering and barbecue at night. At this time, the eunuch in charge was walking around, as if he was checking whether his subordinates were doing things with care. And when they saw Pu Qiutai and others, they hurriedly stepped forward with a smile on their faces, and said respectfully, "Concubine Wen is here? Today, everyone is going to eat barbecue and set off fireworks in this courtyard, and the mother will also come to have fun with the servants." Pu Qiutai was not a person who liked to join in the fun. But when he looked down, he saw that Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang's faces were trying their best to hide the excitement, so he groaned slightly, and then nodded and said, "Okay. Then I'll come over tonight to join in the fun." Honglian had already walked around Chai He at this time, and when she turned around, she smiled and said, "Okay, eunuch Liang. I have only heard that no one cares about this cold palace, but looking at it today, this preparation is still quite rich. You have opened your old face to ask for it, right?" Eunuch Liang hurriedly smiled and said, "Girls' words can hurt me, what am I? Can you have this face?" These are all sent to the door on their own initiative, although no one said it. But I know that this is all concubine Wen's face. Maybe it was secretly signaled by the emperor. So, if concubine Wen doesn't come at night, the slave will be really uneasy. "I see." Pu Qiutai raised his eyebrows, and didn't say anything. Over there, Honglian and eunuch Liang talked and laughed a few words, and suddenly heard a little palace maid outside. "Concubine Wen, Sister Honglian, His Royal Highness Crown Prince and His Second Highness are here. Just waiting at your residence." Honglian and Pu Qiutai glanced at each other, and Honglian smiled and said, "His Royal Highness Crown Prince has always been willful. But I didn't expect him to still remember the love that mother taught him in the past few days." "Don't talk nonsense, maybe they were just curious about what the cold palace was like. So they came over to take a look." Pu Qiutai didn't pretend to be amorous, but he still turned around and walked out of the big courtyard. When he saw Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang trembling, he took one in one hand and said in a deep voice, "Don't be afraid, there is an uncle." Back at the residence, sure enough, Sha Dongming and Sha Dongqing were in the courtyard, followed by a few eunuchs, holding a large vermilion food box, but sweating on their foreheads on a cold day. It can be seen that the weight of the food box is not light. Why did the two highnesses come here? This is a cold palace, and it is not a place to play. Pu Qiutai stepped forward and asked in a deep voice, but saw Sha Dongming pouting and said, "I'll send you something, lest you teach me a lesson, but teach an ungrateful little rabbit." I never thought of it that way. The cold palace is an ominous place. And His Royal Highness is a dignified prince. Pu Qiutai felt a little funny, and hurriedly clarified, and before he finished speaking, he saw Sha Dongming waving his hand and said impatiently, "What about the ominous land? I am a dignified prince, what bad place can restrain me? Okay, get inside, there's a freeze outside." Who made His Highness strong? When I came here, I was wearing such a thin cloak, so many fox fur and mink cloaks, and I only wore such a light cloak. Honglian took over the conversation and opened the door to let the two children into the house. Good. Since my father sent my mother into the cold palace, I don't want to mention how painful it is. As a result, the mother concubine is good, and he is like a fish in water in this cold palace. Not, I'll see, there's still a heart for poetry, and so much more. Sha Dongming complained from the moment he entered the door and saw this neat room, chattering so that Pu Qiutai was full of black lines on his forehead. After listening to it for a while, even the green tendons jumped out, and he had to interrupt the kid who was jumping up and down, and said with a gloomy face, "Your Highness, I have been beaten into the cold palace. It seems inappropriate for you to call me my mother again, right? It's so ruthless." Sha Dongming shook his head thoughtfully. "Although my mother concubine was sent to the cold palace, but my father did not send me to someone else's name, so of course you are still my mother's concubine. My mother taught me loyalty, filial piety, and righteousness. How can I be the villain who tends to be inflammatory? Besides, as the saying goes, the son is not an ugly mother and a dog is not a poor family. How could I cut off the mother-son relationship with you because the mother concubine was beaten into the cold palace?" Pu Qiutai almost vomited blood. What did this bastard prince say? What is the mother-son relationship? Bah! I'm not his mother, and besides, I'm a man. It's so fun to recognize a man as a mother? Actually, this little bastard is deliberately angry with himself. Right? His Royal Highness Crown Prince, where is the Emperor staying tonight? Seeing that Pu Qiutai's face was almost black to the bottom of the pot, Honglian hurriedly smiled and asked about Xia Linxuan's situation, and secretly said, "If the mother knew that the Emperor was lovesick, I don't know if there would be a trace of concern in my heart." This month, my father Emperor has stayed in the Yinyu Palace, the Ningxiang Palace, the Qingliang Palace, and other palaces, that I heard those concubines whispering from the imperial grandmother, and they only said that now that they are fine, they can finally get wet with rain and dew. I don't know what that means. But they seem to be happy anyway. The little prince said that the Honglian sweat came down, and she couldn't help but glance at this kid. He is indeed still a child. But why do you think that he can't really know what the word rain and dew mean? Okay, mother's face is no longer the bottom of the pot, it's simply coal. His Royal Highness Crown Prince. Can we stop talking? You just said that the Emperor is in pain, but this is clearly a song every night, and you are in pain. The spicy Honglian was so angry that she burst into a foul mouth in her heart. Sha Dongming also immediately realized that there was a language problem in his words. And he couldn't help but stick out his tongue, and hurriedly went to open the food boxes one by one, and proudly invited credit. Mother, I know that you live a hard life in the cold palace. So I wanted to come over before, but my father didn't let me. So it's easy to be grandmother today. Let me visit you. Look, how many good things have I looted for you? Not, actually. It's not me anymore. The last time my father went to greet the emperor's grandmother, the emperor's grandmother also said that he was a good person when she looked at you. And asked my father why he always deceived you too much, and she babbled that my father had been for a long time, and you didn't see my father's face when he came out. And it was almost green into a cucumber. Listening to the little prince's chatter, the gloomy color on Pu Qiutai's face gradually receded, and he looked at the dazzling array of snacks, dried meat, nuts, and citrus lemons and other fruits that are rare in the north in winter, and he was a little stunned for a while. The young man was proud of the title of the gold list. And the emperor admired Xia Lin's support. He has had these scenery, but after a short period of glory, what awaits him is the dark and treacherous clouds of the government. And finally he resigned gloomily. Even if he has the grace of the old country, he did not hesitate to give up his enthusiasm for serving the country under the instigation of those traitorous ministers. This had made him desperate for a long time, although he hated the invasion of the daimyo dynasty and hated Xia Linxuan's atrocities. But he couldn't help but admit that although this tyrant destroyed the Qing dynasty that he had paid all his feelings to, but he brought the people of the world a peaceful and prosperous world. And the people were the most important and the king was lighter. From this point of view, it seemed that his hatred is simply unreasonable. If, one day, he will be able to let go of his knots and assist him to make the splendid rivers and mountains in the world immortal, so that the people can live a peaceful life, and no longer be displaced. And the people will no longer have a hard life, as if. Not bad either. It's a pity. The king didn't fancy his own talent, he only regarded himself as a male pet, an object to be conquered. Maybe now, he also has more or less feelings for himself, but so what? Those feelings are simply something that I can't avoid. As soon as I thought of this, the trace of emotion that had just been inexplicably born disappeared without a trace. However, after seeing Xia Dongming busily stuffing oranges and nuts into his hands, he still felt a little warm in his heart. Thank you, His Royal Highness Crown Prince, for coming to see me today, but today on Chinese New Year's Eve, you still have to go to Sining Palace and Yangshin Hall to see the Emperor, Imperial Grandmother, and you have to go to the Royal Teacher to salute. There are many things to be busy with. So go back quickly. As soon as he mentioned this, Xia Dongming's little face was annoyed, and he frowned and said, "It's nothing to go to Sining Palace to see the Emperor's grandmother. The most annoying thing is to see those foreign women tomorrow. Not to mention going to salute those old men. Mother, don't worry, even for my own sake. I must intercede with my father and ask him to let you out as soon as possible. Your Highness doesn't bother with this matter." Pu Qiutai hurriedly interrupted Xia Dongming's words. He lived very well in the cold palace, without Xia Linxuan's night and night sleep. This period of time was simply the most comfortable for him in more than a year. If possible, he really hoped that he could live in this cold palace for a lifetime, even if he was poor and hard-working. Xia Dongming pursed his lips and whispered, "I know what the mother concubine thinks. But you should dye your mind. Even if I don't intercede, my father will definitely not be able to bear it. I still hope that my mother will be my concubine when he goes out. And let my father dismiss all those old women. Not, Mother, why don't we make a bet and see how many months my father can endure it? I don't think it will be more than 3 months. Honglian, send the prince out." Pu Qiutai stretched out his hand and rubbed his eyebrows, seeing that Xia Dongming and Xia Dongqing, who had not spoken, were invited out by Honglian. And the little prince was still muttering something in his mouth. "I know you don't like to listen, but this is a fact. My father will definitely not be able to endure it for more than 3 months. His heart was full of helplessness and bitterness. I hope that Xia Linxuan's bastard's determination will exceed Xia Dongming's expectations. It is best for 3 years. No. Don't come to him again for the rest of your life. Mother, wear more, although there is no wind, this is the coldest time. Honglian tied the belt of Jiyu Rongdeu for Pu Qiutai, thought about it, and picked up the mink fur cloak again, only to be so frightened that Pu Qiutai took a few steps back, and said in a loud voice, "What are you doing, Honglian? That's enough. There's a cloak on the outside of the big one, what is that like? Do you want me to dress me as a ball?" The slave is also afraid that the mother will suffer from the cold, so she is just kind. Why does the mother poke the slave's sore feet? Honglian couldn't help laughing, put the mink cloak back, and saw that Zhu Mingfang's sister and brother were also dressed. So she clapped her hands and said, "Okay, let's go out. You'll finish reading it early, and you'll come back early." The morning glow and colorful clouds mention the 2 glass lanterns, which are brighter than ordinary lanterns. Chaosha Kaiyun agreed, so the group went out, walked for a quarter of an hour, and came to the courtyard, only to see that there were not many people gathered in the courtyard as they imagined, only 20 or 30 eunuchs and palace maids who had been on errands in the cold palace for a long time. But none of the palace concubines and the people who served around them were gone. What's going on? It's rare to be lively, why didn't those palace concubines come? Honglian was very surprised, and when she saw eunuch Liang stepping forward with a smile, she asked. Alas! Eunuch Liang patted his thigh. "Girl, don't mention them. If this person is imprisoned in the cold palace, then what's the good thing? On weekdays, they are crazy. And everyone who sees them thinks they are going to harm them, especially the old lady who died a few days ago. Although the outside said that she died violently. But what else do we people in not know? They are even more afraid. Plus this Chinese New Year's Eve, there is still a snack on the side of the imperial dining room, and the meals sent are good. So naturally they refuse to come and freeze in order to eat roast lamb, in case they are pushed into the fire and burned to death. It is not bad." Pu Qiutai was also very surprised when he heard this, but after thinking about it, those concubines were originally favored people. But they suddenly fell out of favor and entered the cold palace, such a difference between heaven and earth. It can indeed drive people crazy, so he didn't say anything, and saw that the firewood was already burning over there, so he happily went. Although they are all low-status eunuchs and palace maids, but with them, Pu Qiutai feels more comfortable than being with Xia Linxuan. Not to mention the 2 children, in this place, they don't have to tremble, so they shook off their cheeks and munched on a lot of fun. And finally, under the urging of Honglian and Pu Qiutai, seeing the crowd gradually disperse, they were reluctant to go back to keep the new year. At the time of the 3rd watch, fireworks were set off all over the palace, and then it slowly fell silent, but many houses were still lit up. But those who did not have to do anything the next day were insisting on keeping the new year. Although Xia Linxuan was the emperor, he was no exception. And he heard Xia Dongming and Xia Dongqing laughing energetically in the house, so he came to the railing and looked at the northwest from afar. Xiao Beiji naturally knew what was on his master's mind, and at this time, seeing that Xia Linxuan's eyes seemed to be stupid, he stepped forward and said softly, "Don't worry, the emperor. Didn't His Royal Highness Crown Prince say it when he came back today? Concubine Wen looks very good. Of course he's fine, I didn't pester him, let alone the cold palace, even if it was a prison. He was willing to nest there." The corners of Xia Linxuan's mouth twitched twice. "It's not good for me, it's me who has endured the pain of lovesickness these days. And I have to be humble and wronged among those women who invite pets and flattery. Can you understand how painful this is? Xiao Beiji shook his head and said that he couldn't understand. Of course he can't understand it. So many noble and stunning beauties have tried their best to smile just for Emperor Happy. This is what many men dream of. It will become painful for their own masters. If you say this, you will be beaten to death by those singles who don't even have wives, right? Forget it. I know you don't understand. Xia Linxuan sighed. It's cold in high places. Although he is the most noble 95, this status cannot help him get the heart of the person he loves the most. Alas! Who can understand this loneliness and coldness? His Majesty Emperor was very sorry for himself. The Emperor doesn't have to worry. After a while, you will welcome concubine Wen back to Yunhai Palace. Xiao Beiji comforted his master with a smile. Now bear with it, you put concubine Wen into the cold palace. You have to let him be comfortable for a few days. The slave just saw fireworks in the direction of the cold palace, which shows that because mother is there, the conditions are not bad. And the emperor really doesn't have to worry about mother. I'm not worried that he will not have a good time in the cold palace. I am just worried that he will not be happy. How can I welcome him back to the Yunhai Palace in the future? Xia Linxuan shook his head and sighed, suddenly came back to his senses, and turned his head to look at Xiao Beiji on the side. What did you just say? The cold palace actually set off fireworks? Yes, it's the third watch, but it'll be over in a while. The slave heard a report that there was a roast sheep there tonight. In short, it was more lively than in previous years. It is estimated that this is all office everywhere who dare not offend concubine Wen, so they opened the net and gave sheep and fireworks. If it was in previous years, where would there be such treatment in the cold palace? Xiao Beiji explained with a smile, and then sighed on his hand. Your Majesty, it's too cold this day. Even if you have material arts, you should still go into the house, beware of a cold wind, and you have to take medicine and acupuncture to suffer. I don't know how cold it is. Xia Linxuan frowned. It's just Qiutai's small body and bones. If he goes to eat roast mutton and watch fireworks, can he stand the cold? This is a little strange. Xiao Beiji, you ordered someone to secretly investigate and see who made the suggestion. The emperor thinks. Is this someone making trouble? No, not really. Right? Xiao Beiji was really defeated by the master's rich associative power, although he knew that Xia Linxuan was too nervous about Pu Qiutai's safety. But he was so nervous that he was simply a soldier at all, right? This is seriously inconsistent with the image of the master in the past who was wise and martial. For any suspicious, it is better to kill by mistake than to let go. Xia Linxuan said in a deep voice, I must not let Qiutai be harmed in the slightest, the so-called luring the snake out of the hole. That is also under the condition of being completely sure. Otherwise, no matter how anxious I am, I will not be able to risk Qiutai's life. The emperor is really in love with concubine Wen. Xiao Beiji wiped his eyes with emotion. Your Majesty, don't worry. The slave will go to check in person, and you must not let go of any clues that may become clues.